인사드리고 인사 카메라 보고 할까 아니면
그냥 뭐 보고 이렇게 하셔도.
그러면 저보고 간단히 인사 좀 부탁드립니다.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Please have a look at me, and I really would appreciate if you would say hello to the audience.
Sure, introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm really glad to have this opportunity to speak to you about generative AI and any questions you might have. I hope I can answer some of them. My name is Professor Mira Sundara Rajan. I'm a professor. I'm also a copyright consultant. I work internationally in many different countries, and I'm advising on technology and how law and culture interact with technology. So AI, it's a very key moment for us, obviously, and I have lots of ideas about how we can take this forward.
생성형 AI가 등장한 지 꽤 시간이 많이 지났는데 아직도 이렇게 명확한 법이 있는 나라가 몇 군데 없는 것 같아서 가장 좀 까다로운 부분이 뭐가 있는지 설립하는 데 있어서.
It's been quite a long time since generative AI has come into place. But there, as you have mentioned in your forum, there has not been any clear solutions. So what do you think the most obstacles? Yes.
I think that's a great question, and it's not a very difficult question to answer, actually, because when it comes to technology, there's a lot of excitement, and technology generates a lot of wealth, and there are a lot of structures in place to help us to realize that wealth. Companies are engaged in making big investments, so I think there's a really strong financial pressure that is driving a lot of these developments, apart from the scientific innovation, which is a slightly different issue. And for that reason, it's difficult to make policy on this area because actually we need to balance the different interests involved when it comes to such an important technology. You know, this is potentially a great source of wealth generation, but it's also a technology that can fundamentally change so many things about the world. And I think that it's affecting people at a visceral level because all of a sudden we're talking about a world where machines are going to be doing a lot of things that people have historically seen as being an important part of being human. And it's about our creativity, it's about our art, our culture, about how we consider our own place in the world. And so here we have this technology that's very challenging, where there are a lot of financial pressures at work and a lot of drive to generate wealth out of it. But at the same time, this deeply emotional awareness on the part of many people that here's something that challenges our basic humanity, and how are we going to deal with this going forward? So it's a very emotionally charged area, very difficult to make policy.
파이낸셜 프레셔랑 사람들의 인간다움에 대해 조금 자세히 설명해 주실 수 있는지.
Could you be more specific about financial pressure and the humanity part?
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as the whole economic side of it, the financial pressures involved, I mean, I think we've seen this play out in many ways with the technology field so far. Technology is a major economic driver in a lot of the world, major countries. Notably the United States, technology is probably the most important driver of wealth right now. So there are huge incentives to try to generate more and more wealth out of technology. And we've set up certain models for doing that. Right now I'm living in California, so I see this in action all the time in the Bay Area. The large tech companies, they're very powerful. They're the ones that provide jobs. They're the ones that keep the economy really active in that area, and there's a whole infrastructure that's set up. There's an acceptance that there are large collections of capital, that they're controlled by these companies, and that they govern a lot of what's happening in society at a very practical level. And I think these are the same kinds of pressures that inevitably are coming into play now when it comes to AI, partly because a lot of the players in tech so far, many of them are now finding their footing in AI development. So these are the same players with the same sort of established patterns of business, the same incentive systems. They're coming into the area of AI. and there aren't a lot of alternatives in place. So I think this is the financial side. And honestly, speaking as someone who works in copyright, this is a broader issue in copyright law and policy making. It's not just about AI. You know, whether we're going to talk about the music industry, the film industry, it's always this situation where there's a lot of capital, there's a lot of economic power, and it's sometimes difficult, to say the least, to keep in focus what's happening at the level of individual creators, people who want to be involved in these forms of art, entertainment, creativity. It's really tough for them, and they're up against a lot of powerful interests that they may not have what's needed to handle. So that takes me to the other side of your question then. How does human creativity play into it? I mean, I think it's almost a miracle. So when we think about human creativity, oftentimes people want to talk about what distinguishes human beings from, let's say, other forms of animal life and so on. And I think, honestly, if there is a question to this answer, which is debatable, but if there were an answer to this question, then looking back through time, our creative activities as a species have been with us from the very beginning. You know, and the oldest sort of evidence of human society is art. If art is there, humans were there. And this is something we know that's going back, you know, to time immemorial. So somehow we've managed to maintain our existence as a creative species, even through all these technological changes, through all this time. And now here we are, and it's artificial intelligence, and all these claims are being made about AI being creative. Is it going to replace human beings who are writing, who are acting, who are making music? Is it even going to replace their identities? You know, AI images are going to star in films instead of actors and actresses. So it's a really challenging thing. And there's a strong economic incentive, you know, for these things to go ahead. Let's face it, all the strikes that have been happening in Hollywood, it's because there's an awareness that it could be a lot cheaper and more convenient for companies to deal with that AI image in a movie than with the actual actor. Because people are messy, difficult to deal with. They get upset if you don't treat them right. They sue you. You owe them money. They expect things from you. AI doesn't. And so here is potentially a powerful conflict. And I think that's what's triggered such a powerful reaction. You know, that we see thousands of people getting together with a shared interest, going on strike, taking on the studios in Hollywood, and determined to exact a measure of justice for themselves, to be treated at a human level on a fair basis. So it's quite amazing, actually, what's happening.
고려할 요소들이 많은 상황에서 이런 법안의 설립이 좀 필요하다고 보시는지 아니면 좀 상황을 지켜볼 필요가 있다고 보시는지.
As you have mentioned, there are so many elements that we need to consider to come up with the resolutions. In this regard, do you think that there should be a legal provisions or legal policy that should come right away, or do you think it takes some time? It should take some time.
I think that's a really good question. That's a really intelligent question, actually, about law and policy making. You know, because it's true, we're at a very early stage of things where we don't know what the full implications might be of the technology. That's very true. But at the same time, I do think there are certain basic things that are clear to us now, you know, notably about the challenges to the creative professions and humans' ability to go on engaging in those professions, gaining the respect and the livelihood and so on. So I think actually it's extremely important that at this point in time, we should set some basic rules, some basic parameters about how this is going to be, and make sure that we have, I'll call it a basic human rights framework in place, so that we can acknowledge that we do value human creativity, and we recognize that that has to remain central to everything that we're doing in the future. You know, the problem is not with AI, I don't think. I don't think that there's anything wrong with AI. On the contrary, I think it's a tremendously exciting technology. And to me, it's an expression of human creativity. You know, here is one more type of tool, one more instrument that human beings are going to be able to use to exercise our creativity and hopefully to build a better world. But we need to have that commitment at the level of basic respect for ourselves as human beings, for our creative nature, for the people that dedicate their lives to being involved in creative activities and who want to continue to contribute in a creative way to society. And if we don't establish the parameters now, very, very quickly, I think it's going to be too late, because this technology is powerful. It is self-generating in many ways, just by definition. In fact, that in itself is a tricky thing, because it's self-generating, but it's using all of the human knowledge that's already out there to develop its own generative capabilities. So we need clarity at this stage, and we need to affirm our commitment to human creativity and to the people that are carrying forward creative endeavors. I think this is so important at this time.
그 툴이란 인스트루먼트라는 표현을 사용해 주시는데 많은 사람들은 인간을 이제 대체할 수도 있다는 위험에 대한 공포감이 있는데 이걸 계속 툴이나 인스트루먼트로 둘 수 있는 방법 중에 하나가 이런 법안의 설립인지 아니면 또 다른 어떤 것들이 있는지 궁금해요.
So you mentioned that AI is one of the tools that human can use, but there is a concern that it could actually substitute the human being, not a tool. So do you think the law can also law can work so that AI can stay as a tool, or do you think that there's another way other than policy that can solve this problem?
I think this is another absolutely key question. And yes, I do think that law can work in terms of helping to solidify the position of AI in society as an instrument versus a replacement, an interloper for the human being, if you will. But I think your question is so important because it's not something that happens in a vacuum. The law functions in a cultural context, in an ethical context. And what we need is to have the awareness and the commitment to what's happening at the level of technology. And we as a society have to have the commitment to ensuring that we deal with AI as an instrument of human creativity and prioritize basic human rights and human dignity. So when I say basic human rights, I mean our rights as creative beings. Because looking at the evidence, going back to the Lascaux caves and so on, this is what we're seeing. Humans are creative beings. So we need to establish that within an ethical and cultural framework. And I think this is a tremendous danger that we see all the time, that there's a feeling that technology is irresistible and that you have to allow technology to take its own course, or else you have to accept that you're a Luddite and simply reject technology. And I think this opposition is completely false. Humans, we have prospered, we have progressed in every sense because of our ability to create and manipulate tools and our environment. So that's also part of our being. Art itself is a manipulation of materials to create culture. So I don't see that as being problematic, but the will, the intention that we are going to use the tools for the betterment of society, on that there can be no compromise.
그 연설 중에 그 AI가 지속 가능성 때문에 그 사람을 도울 것이다 이런 말씀을 해주셨는데 그걸 좀 자세히 설명해 주실 수 있는지.
During your speech, you mentioned that AI could help the human being ultimately because of its sustainability. Could you be more specific, or could you tell us more in detail?
I'm sorry, can you just repeat that?
Yes. Yes. So during your speech, he remembers that you mentioned that AI could help human beings eventually due to its sustainability. So could you be more specific about that?
Yeah, absolutely. If I understand the question, I think maybe what I was saying is that AI needs to be sustainable. And
You called Professor Benzao, and he said that AI models will help people because if they destroy the human, it is self-destructing eventually.
Yes, exactly. I think that has to do with the nature of the technology and its relationship with the human creativity, which is what I was talking about a moment ago. Because I think the terminology of artificial intelligence itself is a little bit misleading, because to a lot of people it probably suggests that somehow this technology is operating as an independent intelligence. And I don't think, from my understanding of the technology, that that's actually correct. It's generative in nature, that's a better description. And it is generative based on the human inputs that it's absorbed, based on the informational inputs that it's absorbed, the vast majority of which are generated at some level from human knowledge. So I think that's the issue as far as the sustainability of the technology is concerned, that if you devalue the human creators who are providing the knowledge which feeds the AI and allows it to develop, then the technology won't be sustainable because you will be undercutting the resource, the source of the information. I think there's also one more thing that's really interesting, though, which also was hinted at in those comments, which is the whole question of what does the public want to receive? You know, does the public want to receive music generated by AI, for example, in preference to music composed by human beings? And there is a little bit of research on that, actually, from the neuroscience field in relation to music, I believe, which shows that people prefer to receive artworks created by humans and not by machines. And I think that's a clue right away to what our expectations are from artistic and cultural products. You know, we want the connection with another human personality through the cultural work. And in fact, you know, my origin is from India. So there is a great school of philosophy in India called Advaita philosophy, which means the philosophy of unity, of oneness. And so we could even explain art and artistic experience in this way, saying that it breaks down barriers between individual humans through the shared experience of beauty of the work. And so we achieve a sense of unity with other humans and with creation. So it's a very, very important role played by art in the Indian culture and beautifully expressed, I think, in this Advaita philosophy. So sustainability, in that sense, it's about maintaining the human connection. And if we, once again, if we drop that connection, then the very purpose of art and our understanding of our place in the world, in the universe, is going to be compromised. So sustainability is key to this whole discussion.
그 마지막으로 그 할리우드에서 작가의 그 뭐라고 하죠?
할리우드 작가 길드 어떻게
그 합의안?
합의?
네, 그거에서 얘네한테 선택권을 주는 걸로, 그러니까 AI를 쓸지 말지 이 정도만 합의가 되는 거고 뭐 AI의 뭐 진출을 막는다거나 이런 내용은 없었는데 되게 긍정적으로 평가가 됐던 이유가 궁금해요.
네. So recently, the Writers Guild, they have agreed with the industry, and I believe that the writers actually agreed to have kind of opt-out system. So do you think this is the right decision?
그러니까 그 선택권만 가지는 것이 그 기계 자체를 막는 게 아님에도 불구하고 굉장히 긍정적으로 평가받는 이유가 뭔지.
So it's been the reception by the public is that this is actually a good decision, even though it is having the opt-out is not actually blocking AI from entering their industry. So why do you think that this kind of decision has been received a good reception from the public?
Yeah, a fantastic point about the opt-out aspect. I think, again, this just goes to the whole heart of what's involved with these debates over AI and why it's affecting people at such a visceral level. So I think the issue for the writers is one of autonomy and self-determination. And so when they find their work included in AI without their explicit consent and awareness of what's happening, there's a sense of loss of control. Loss of control over your work, and also loss of control over your own creativity and how the work is going to evolve in the world. So I think it's not at all surprising to me that this evokes extremely strong feelings for the writers, being able to have the choice. And I think this goes back to what I was saying a minute ago about the technology itself not having any particular character, if I can put it that way. There's nothing evil or malicious or even necessarily incompatible with human creativity about AI technology. I don't think so, not any more than pretty much any other technology. But it's this idea of losing control and being the tool instead of using the tool as your instrument. And I think that this really offends that individual sense of human self-determination, which is so important to everyone and to creative people, I think, more than anyone, because the creative act is an act of freedom. And without that basic freedom to explore and to be creative, it's very difficult or impossible to function as a creative person. We see that in other contexts, people who write and who create music and so on in repressive political environments. Sooner or later, almost inevitably, they find themselves confronting limits. And often that's very dangerous for them, because their self-determination, their freedom is required for them to be creative. And I think that's why the opt-out just really goes to the heart of all of these matters. They should be able to choose how they're going to relate to AI, whether or not they're going to participate, and on what terms.
간단히 하나 여쭤보면 이 법안이 아직 확정이 안 됐기 때문에 지금 세계적으로 벌어지는 일들이 좀 어떤 이슈들이 있는지 AI를 조정 관련해서.
Due to the unpredictability of AI, and there's not been any specific rules concerning AI, what kind of issues or concerns do you see all over the world?
I think we're in a very dangerous situation where, because we haven't really arrived at an ethical commitment, call it ethical, call it social, cultural, I think they're all saying the same things about how we want to deal with AI, is very dangerous. The technology is powerful and has the capacity to evolve, I don't want to say independently, but to evolve rapidly. And it's potentially available for misuse by bad actors. So I think it's, as I said before, it's a very tricky time. We need to establish certain basic parameters to really orient the development of the technology away from those dangerous, nefarious situations and make sure that transparency is there so that the public knows what's happening, how the AI is being used, the information that they're receiving, what the source of it is, to protect, not only to protect at the cultural and creative level, but also even to protect our democracies and our social governance. We need to know where information is coming from, what the purpose is behind that information, and how we can remain in control of how we receive that information. So again, just to reiterate what I said before, I think it's a really key moment and we need to get certain basic principles in place.
실제 예시를 한두 개만 좀 간단히 설명해 주실 수 있을까요?
저작권을.
네, 그런 뭐 소송자.
네. Could you share us with the most recent kind of lawsuits or cases concerning copyright?
In relation to AI or
Yes.
yes, in relation to yeah, there's a lot happening right now in terms of legal conflicts related to AI. So I think the one that is most in focus for a lot of people is what's happening in Hollywood. So the writers have settled their situation with Hollywood, but actors and performers have not. And I think it's been more than 100 days now that they've been on strike. And you think about it, like Hollywood is movies, and now there are no actors and musicians as well. As far as I understand, they're also covered by SAG-AFTRA. So I think this is a major conflict that's ongoing that is going to have to be settled. A solution is going to have to be found. And it's going to be very difficult because of this problem of identity substitution through the AI likenesses. It's going to be much more difficult, I think, to find a solution to this, even than it was for the writers' conflict. So that's something really important to keep an eye out for. And then one other thing that was, I think, mentioned by one of the other speakers in the conference as well, has to do with many of the companies generating AI are being sued by content providers or content creators, to put it that way. So authors of literary texts and so on. That gentleman had spoken about the Authors Guild of America as being an example. So many of these author representative organizations have gotten together and are launching not one, but I believe it's multiple lawsuits actually against the AI companies. And that's going to be something to watch extremely carefully, because there is strength in numbers, and these representative organizations for the artistic community are going to be in a position to pursue this in the courts and potentially come up with rulings. And that's what we do when there isn't legislation in place, especially in common law countries like the United States and so on. We tend to fall back upon the courts to tell us how to go forward and what's right and wrong in particular situations. Sometimes it works well, sometimes not so well. So fingers crossed.